good topic is COVID. Is this a problem? Or is this an opportunity?
That really depends. Of course, for online business, movies, TV series, i.e. all media, all online cinemas. This is an opportunity. Online has jumped on now. Porno Hub. Well, this industry never seemed to need additional introduction and extra PR.
Well, after they introduced this free premium, all European internet providers said that Pornhub traffic increased by 30%. 30% of traffic. This is a lot.
Because everyone is sitting at home.
Big respect to the guys from Pornhub. I mean, the engineers that they withstood such loads, it's just something unimaginable.
Well, apparently they themselves are ready for at least high loads and are disposed in such a way that they could scale quickly. The question is, how quickly and fleeting they managed to scale such a volume. It's very cool.
And it was unexpected. It's one thing when you plan, at least somehow plan in a month or two.
Well, I can say so. We provided international cloud infrastructure. And by that moment, we were just buying servers by boxes because there were plenty of different online businesses which just had an increased load. And they just do what you want. We are ready to pay any money. Just give us 100 servers right here and now.
It should be known that it was not easy at all to buy servers at that time because the border with China was closed and everyone was emptying internal local warehouses. It was just something really crazy. Let's talk about why people migrate to the clouds. That is, what is the point of business migrating to the cloud now?
I've defined for myself the mechanics and laws of gaming. Why are they using cloud? It is clear that from the point of view of an external provider, they are aimed only at an international provider because basically game projects are geared towards an international shot. They try to test a hypothesis in different markets where their game will shoot or not. Accordingly, the points should be all over the world. This is the first point. The second point is that we don't know and can't predict at all whether this game will jump on or not. And if it does, then it should be an instant increase. That is, either you provide access to the game and more players are recruited to you, or goodbye. Well, the same as Black Fridays and so on. You need to plan for these peaks, but the peaks themselves from the point of view of the shot cannot be planned because it can shoot. Well, yes, we will reserve 1,000 cores. It will cost us a particular money. Well, relatively speaking. I'm a game developer. I belong to some kind of publisher and conventionally can have some percentage of a resource reservation. Or it may shoot the X100. And what should I do with it? This is the second problem. And here the problem is as follows, that the gamers themselves are very fond of hardware. Here is the specificity. No matter how he is persuaded about virtual machines and so on, certainly for some middleware, backend, and so on, for some third-party services, they certainly use virtual machines and watch, cloud, and so on. But from the point of view of a multiplayer server, they literally all speak as one. So give us the hardware.
As an engineer, I can even explain it later. Why is this direction being created? Gamers, game engineers, they, like no one else, are very good at working with loads. They understand which metrics can affect the performance of a particular client. Because if the site slows down, then they will look and wait an extra half a second. It will be unpleasant, and if your game starts hampering during the rush and there will be a delay, which in any case, from the point of view of using one virtual box even on bare metal, but still with a hypervisor, will still be very noticeable for you one way or another. And the gamers are very good at watching a client's performance, that is, how the client feels. That is why they are very sensitive to latency. They are well aware that any layer of abstraction is an addition to latency, and this is an additional negative experience for their clients. So, as an engineer, I understand them perfectly.
Well, the question of scalability immediately arises because unlike virtual machines where you can quickly scale, once the virtual machine has risen, then the containers rise in microseconds, etc. With hardware, it is more difficult in terms of capacity. Well, they asked for marketing and now I turn it on.
Colleagues, if any service provider tells you that we raise containers in nanoseconds or microseconds, guys, this is marketing. Don't forget about it.
Bare metal cars, which in terms of capacity are very difficult to plan, and they really end up. This is metal. The second is how fast you can raise it. Either you keep a hot reserve all the time, but if you have an influx, then how quickly would we rise? And here the providers say, okay, we are ready to try to raise it. And just to knock off this peak on virtual machines, we are ready to raise the workload on virtual cars. But there should be a single connectivity between virtual machines and bare metal. This should live in a single L2, and accordingly, so that everything was accessible via the API, so that we automate as much as possible. Watch the real load and quickly zap and raise our virtual machine and add it to the general. If the load dropped, we removed it all, and we continue to live on hardware, what we really like, what we are ready for. This is the main trend, probably, for gamers. This is what they want, and that is where we are striving, in order to give them this very tool, which they lack. That is, they are not talking about some kind of abstraction. Give us just hardware, give us virtual machines, and give us a normal network.
This often results in a new trend when, for a very long time, by IT standards, several years, the main positioning of all services was that we will do the entire infrastructure part for you and give you the final result that you can already work with. But in fact, many companies come for what Seva is talking about. These are resources. Reliable, stable infrastructure, good network in terms of performance, in terms of functions, everything else, including automation, their environment, they start independently.
Well, give us another API, which we will pull. That's all.
We must also very clearly understand that any cloud is not about performance. It is about flexibility and scaling. That is, if your technical profile is tied to performance, you need to think very clearly, watch and test how this or that provider suits you. And yet, few people purposefully follow the cloud performance. Everyone follows the scaling stories, behind the managed cloud stories, all kinds of databases, and so on.
That's why there is a specificity of providers. Cloud providers, including those that occupy not only the service component, namely, provide not just scalable, but also fast resources. And returning to the bare metal cloud topic, this is just the use of physical servers according to the cloud model. This seems to be such a pretty interesting trend, a situation when an industry may need a large amount of resources, but this is completely unpredictable.
But for the provider, it is a big challenge. Why? Because, as Seva correctly mentioned, the servers are physically not the fastest that can be delivered. That is, the provider must always have a magic pool of metal, some kind of hardware calculated by the provider, which he can get quickly like that.
Quite right. In fact, this is also such a holy war topic. If we're talking about fast scaling and fast resources, having scanned, say, a virtual machine via an API request, instantly there in a few seconds. No, the virtual machine quickly appeared, but the question of hardware does not disappear anywhere. Virtual machines are raised in the same way on hypervisors. Hypervisors are just the same servers. If you have 100 and the first virtual machine on one server arised, think, will you get the performance that you wanted so much?
Let's not play up. All cloud providers are engaged in oversale.
Well, I don't know. I don't know anything.
It seems to me no economy will converge without it. And this, if you look at the SLA, almost everyone writes about it. For example, Yandex. They generally have a separate type of cores which work there for 1/10, for 1/20th, for 1/5. This is a completely normal story, and this is correct because dealing with large numbers when you have many completely different clients, it is clear that no one ever uses your resources one-to-one. If you use resources one-to-one, then a client comes to you because he came to the cloud directly for that purpose. Usually, we tell the client about this, that guys, we use one-to-one. We will need a complete bandwidth, and this is always another story. Very often it happens that many engineers, managers think, well, no matter how the company made it to the top, it doesn't matter. I'm just getting my salary.
Oh, I think it's just 90% actually. I saw different companies, but for the most part, ideologically, you do not understand what the company is striving for at all, especially at a high level. Let's go to any big company there. Well, Spur, for instance. Come to the engineer. Tell me, do you understand what you're working for and what you're doing in general?
Are you glad that ROI has moved higher?
And I do that. I now have my responsibilities. I do these duties. I have stability. I feed my family. Everything is cool with me. But this is due to the fact that, again, there's a lot of hierarchy. And in startups, on the contrary, every person is a key link in the success of a product, project, and so on. And keeping this culture of the startup inside a large corporation, you think how not to stifle this culture with bureaucracy and the addition imposed abstraction, and how to make it in such a way that even an engineer, a junior engineer, would feel his responsibility and importance in the project. This, it seems to me, is such a big challenge for any company and perhaps is a kind of success.
You have touched on a very interesting topic, the transition of large enterprise companies to the startup format. Is that possible? And if it is possible, what can be done for this? Are there any good examples?
You mean growing startups from the inside? It seems to me this is very difficult to do economically, first of all.
Yes, growing startups within or transforming your core business from a model that we usually call legacy with a monolithic structure that is usually very difficult to change. Change processes change the format of work between people, change the formats of communication between employees.
It seems to me this is very difficult to do economically, first of all, because an already formed company has a very clear economic structure. The amount of money that can be spent on investments, where they get the main money in terms of income, that is, the income structure is very clear. A startup, it seems to me, implies a completely different economic model. That is, no one will radically rebuild the enterprise structure to match the structure of a startup. This is if we are talking about growing startups inside. But this is such an investment project that it seems many are now beginning to take into account. That is, it will be a good practice to think about it.
To create some kind of ecosystem under your well-known brand. Maybe small projects, maybe quite mature.
Maybe just buy and continue to cultivate. Also a nice story, this is an investment project. Today, for example, everything revolves around Sberbank. Sberbank has absolutely the same picture. It's just that Sberbank has a cheat for money. Like many banks, they have a cheat for money. Their incomes are quite endless.
In fact, against this background, the news about the fact that YANDEX.CLOUD has become a separate company looks very interesting. It's separated into such an independent structure, business structure. What can contribute to making such a decision?
It seems to me that there is such a message to YANDEX.CLOUD, that we guys invested a lot of money in you. How much is there, 2-3 years? We want to see a profit. Let's get more cost effective. That is, from the very beginning, as I get it, they adopted such an investment scheme that we are pumping a lot. Yandex is a special case in general. Many technologies are developed from within. This is a huge plus for them. It seems that this is such an icon that they say, guys, you embark on an independent big voyage. Let's see what comes of it.
The question is, did they deserve it, or is it some deliberate action on the part of business?
Actually, it's a good question. Here, it seems to me you have to be very internally in the subject of the company itself in order to understand. I wonder if this is a direct, deliberate story with the fact that it is necessary to turn into a full-fledged business and start bringing money.
Most likely. I guess that if you look at the history of Yandex, then certain projects are allocated to separate companies. But for me, on the contrary, it seems to me to receive recognition and respect from the head office. You guys seem to have grown up. You have clients, that is, they nurture and cultivate new products inside at first. Then, if it jumps on, they allocate it or attach it to some other daughter. For example, Yandex Drive, Yandex Taxi, and so on. Perhaps, subjectively, but for me, this is such a point where the guys grew up. Guys, move on your own. Of course, with profit. Now we understand how much you spend on your own without internal separation and so on. Because most likely it is very difficult to understand what relates to YANDEX.CLOUD, how much you spent on YANDEX.CLOUD, and how much other projects have spent.
Especially in terms of OPEX of all kinds, which is very difficult to calculate.
That's right, yes. Now guys, if you are so great, and you really are, then let's go, so that you fully understand all the costs if necessary. It's like some kind of additional privilege that is a separate legal entity. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. That is, here, it probably makes sense to talk to Yandex itself, of course. But I, as an external subject who looks at Yandex, really like it and what it does, and so on. It seems to me that this is a good call for Yandex itself and for YANDEX.CLOUD in general. Well, the key question is whether they did it really for internal tasks, or is it some kind of showing off, for the internal market in connection with the latest situations.
In fact, this is just a very interesting experiment because, as they say, as far as I have read, that such an approach will not discard the ideas that can help to develop innovatively. That is, a person ceases to be afraid to tell. For example, stupidity in the presence of a boss.
This is the very fear of mistakes with which we began today's meeting. Fear of a mistake, fear of appearing stupid, wrong, or making some wrong decision. In a situation where there is no correct answer to many questions in IT, in fact. That is, there are a lot of ways along which you can reach one goal or another. And the key point is not to drive employees and engineers into some kind of framework.
Yes, these are very correct thoughts, and what I would like to strive for, in fact. But there is a cost of error, yes, and it is always very different. The error price can be $100 or $1,000, or it may cost $10 million. But is it worth fearing the slightest mistakes? Yes, we have to keep the boundaries, but we must also make mistakes. Without mistakes, of course, there will never be any innovation. But when the cost of a mistake is a certain amount of millions of dollars, well, the rocket launch, for example, this is a very complicated project. There, the price, besides money, is also human life. This is such a risk. There should be such steel eggs that if, damn it, something goes wrong now, all of the teams have it. And here the story of cohesion, apparently, and the correct ideology plays a great part when everyone understands what they are doing and why. And even if there is this mistake, they are sure that those who surround them are nearby. They will also give a hand, and there will be not one person to blame, but the whole project, in fact. They take this blow entirely upon themselves. And if there is such a correct atmosphere inside, then probably the cost of a mistake will be less because everyone approaches each of the questions responsibly. They can trust the team. Of course, different levels. Different people, of course, different approaches. In general, everyone has a collective responsibility. And accordingly, this allows you to launch projects such as SpaceX and so on. In fact, we touched upon very cool and important topics today, and probably the result of everything that we talked about, one might say, is that nothing is clear what is happening. The world is definitely changing, and IT is changing, and different companies are changing, approaches are changing. But what will happen, for example, tomorrow, and how these processes will go, it seems to me one can only guess. In fact, what do you think?
One example of a Chinese company like AliExpress, Alibaba approaches a change in the mentality of its employees, in my opinion, is a very clear indicator that something will change.
So let's meet in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and we'll talk about what will happen next. Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.